Snoop Dogg walked into a high-end boutique, just looking to buy a special birthday gift for his wife, but what happened next left the entire store in stunned silence. You won't believe how it all unfolded. Like, comment, and subscribe to hear the full story, because this was way more than just a shopping trip. Snoop stepped into the luxurious Beverly Hills boutique, the scent of designer perfume hanging thick in the air as the polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights. He wasn't a regular in places like this, but today, he came dressed for the occasion, sharp blazer, polished shoes, ready to find the perfect gift for the woman who had stood by his side through everything. The moment the entrance bell chimed behind him, the atmosphere shifted. The store manager, a stern-looking woman in her late 40s with platinum blonde hair and a tailored suit that practically screamed authority, glanced up from her phone. Her eyes flicked over him, first his shoes, then his hands, then back to his face, before her expression tightened ever so slightly. Snoop recognized that look instantly. He had seen it before. "Good afternoon," he said smoothly, keeping his voice steady. "I'm looking for a gift for my wife. It's her birthday soon." The woman, now identified as Miss Sinclair, tilted her head slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Instead of a warm greeting, she simply asked, "Do you have an appointment?" Her tone was clipped, cool, calculated. Snoop blinked. "An appointment? Since when did you need an appointment to buy a bracelet?" "No, I wasn't aware I needed one." Her perfectly manicured eyebrow arched ever so slightly. "We typically work with clients by appointment. It's more efficient that way." The word stung, but Snoop kept his composure. "I see. Well, I won't take much of your time, I just want to browse." She hesitated before finally waving a hand toward the far end of the store. "Fine. But we're a high-end boutique. Prices might not be what you're used to." The words landed like a slap. Snoop took a slow breath, unclenching his fists before responding evenly, "I'm aware. Thank you." As he moved toward the jewelry case, he could feel her presence hovering behind him like a shadow, close enough to watch, but not to help. A couple near the glass display exchanged a look before quickly turning away. He focused on the sparkling pieces in front of him, delicate gold necklaces, diamond-studded earrings, elegant bracelets, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Her voice was suddenly closer than expected. "Yes," Snoop replied, turning to face her. "A bracelet. Something elegant but not too flashy. My wife has a simple style." Miss Sinclair's lips curled into a thin, insincere smile. "I see. Well, we have some lovely options, but perhaps you'd prefer to check out our lower-tier collection online. It might be more suitable." Snoop stared at her, stunned at the sheer audacity. For a moment, he considered calling her out, putting her on blast right there in the middle of the store, but then he exhaled, choosing control over confrontation. "I'd still like to see what you have here." The smile never left her face, but her posture stiffened. Reluctantly, she pulled out a tray of bracelets, setting it down with an exaggerated slowness that felt almost mocking. Snoop leaned in, eyes scanning the display, but the weight of her gaze pressing down on him made it impossible to ignore. "This one's beautiful," he finally said, pointing to a slender gold bracelet with a small emerald at its center. "Can I see it up close?" She hesitated, then picked up the bracelet with gloved hands, her movements overly cautious, as if she thought he might grab it and bolt. "This piece is quite exclusive," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. At that moment, the tension in the room reached its peak, and what happened next would change everything. Snoop Dogg walked into a high-end boutique for a simple mission, buy a birthday gift for his wife. But what should have been a quick shopping trip turned into an outrageous moment of discrimination that had the entire store watching. You won't believe how this ended. Like, comment, and subscribe for the full story, because this one is more than just a shopping experience. Snoop held the bracelet in his hand, turning it over carefully, appreciating the craftsmanship. He pictured it on his wife's wrist, the way her eyes would light up when she saw it. A small smile crept onto his face at the thought, until Miss Sinclair's sharp tone sliced through the moment. Are you sure this is in your price range? The words hit like a sucker punch, but Snoop didn't flinch. He had heard this before, felt this before, and yet, it never got any easier. He kept his voice even. I'll let you know once I decide. He placed the bracelet gently back on the counter, but his calm response only seemed to irritate her more. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. You know, we don't usually allow people to browse for too long. It disrupts the flow for our regular clients. Snoop straightened, locking eyes with her. I wasn't aware my presence was disruptive. I'm just here to shop like anyone else. Her smile thinned further, her voice dropping into something almost conspiratorial. It's not personal, sir. It's just policy. Snoop let his gaze drift around the boutique, noting the other customers. No one else was being rushed. No one else was being questioned. No one else had an unspoken time limit on how long they could exist in the space. Before he could respond, Miss Sinclair's voice suddenly rose, loud enough for everyone to hear. Actually, I think we're going to have to ask you to leave. I don't believe we have anything suitable for you. The words landed like a slap. The humiliation crept in, uninvited. Snoop felt the heat rising in his chest, but he kept his tone firm. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just shopping for my wife. Is there a problem? Her tone grew icier. Sir, I don't want to escalate this, but if you don't leave now, I'll have to call security. Snoop's pulse quickened, but outwardly, he remained unmoved. He wasn't about to be forced out without standing his ground. Call them, he said quietly, his voice steady. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not leaving. A ripple of unease moved through the boutique. Whispers spread as customers exchanged glances, some stepping back as if distancing themselves from the situation. The couple near the jewelry case moved slightly away, as if afraid of getting involved. Miss Sinclair didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone with exaggerated motions, making sure everyone saw. I need security at the boutique, she announced loudly, her words designed to make the situation seem more dramatic than it was. We have a situation. Snoop's stomach churned, but he held his ground. He wasn't about to let her strip away his dignity. The seconds stretched, the weight of the moment pressing down on the room. Then, the sound of heavy boots against the marble floor broke the tension. A uniformed security guard entered, broad-shouldered, with the look of a man who had seen too many petty disputes. His eyes flicked to Snoop, then to Miss Sinclair, as if already calculating whose side to take. Ma'am, what seems to be the problem? His voice was firm, neutral. Miss Sinclair wasted no time. This man, she gestured at Snoop, is refusing to leave after I've asked him multiple times. He's making the staff and customers uncomfortable. Snoop couldn't stay silent anymore. Uncomfortable, he repeated, his voice steadied but edged with disbelief. I walked in to buy a gift for my wife. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't caused any trouble. The only discomfort here seems to be your assumption that I don't belong. The guard hesitated, caught between Miss Sinclair's accusations and Snoop's measured response. Sir, I just need to make sure there's no issue here. Snoop spread his arms slightly, making it clear he had nothing to hide. There's no issue, other than being treated unfairly for no reason. I just wanted to buy a bracelet. Miss Sinclair scoffed loudly, shaking her head as if the very idea was absurd. He's clearly not here to buy anything, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. He's been loitering, and I won't allow this store to be used for some kind of spectacle. Snoop felt the heat rising again. Loitering, he repeated, his voice sharp with disbelief. You followed me from the second I walked in. You questioned everything I did. What exactly have I done to make you think I don't belong here? The security guard frowned, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension, one filled with authority and unmistakable outrage. What on earth is going on here? Heads turned toward the entrance. Mr. Harrison, the store's owner, had just stepped inside for an unexpected visit. His tailored suit was crisp, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, and his expression unreadable. But the weight of his presence alone was enough to shift the air in the room. The game had just changed. Mr. Harrison exhaled deeply, the weight of the situation still pressing on the room. He turned his attention to Snoop, his expression shifting from authority to sincerity. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter now, but still firm. "What happened here today was unacceptable. No one, no matter who they are, should ever be made to feel unwelcome in my store." Snoop studied him for a moment, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. "I appreciate that," he said simply. "But like I said, it's not just about me. This happens all the time, to people who don't have the name or the platform to speak up about it." Mr. Harrison nodded solemnly. "And that's exactly why it has to stop." He glanced around the boutique, the other customers still watching, some awkwardly pretending to browse, others looking like they had just witnessed something much bigger than a dispute over a bracelet. Breaking the silence, Mr. Harrison reached for the bracelet Snoop had chosen, lifting it carefully from the counter. "You came here to buy a gift for your wife," he said, his tone shifting. "Let's make sure you leave with it." Snoop hesitated, not because he couldn't afford it, he could buy the whole boutique if he wanted to, but because of what the moment represented. After everything, after the way he had been treated, did he even want to spend his money here? Mr. Harrison seemed to sense the conflict. "Take it," he said, placing the bracelet gently into a velvet box. "Not as a gift, not as an apology, just as a reminder that the people who judge you don't define you." Snoop looked at him for a long moment, then finally reached out and took the box. "Respect," he said, nodding. Mr. Harrison extended his hand, and Snoop shook it firmly. "Thank you for standing your ground today," the store owner said. "Because of you, this place will be better moving forward." As Snoop turned to leave, he felt the eyes of every person in the boutique on him. Some looked ashamed. Others looked like they had learned something. But most just looked like they were still processing what had just happened. He stepped outside, breathing in the cool air, feeling the shift in energy as the door swung shut behind him. A birthday gift for his wife had turned into something much bigger. A lesson. A reckoning. And a reminder that respect isn't given, it's demanded. Realizing they had witnessed something much bigger than a shopping trip. The weight of it all sat heavy on his chest. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, staring out at the Beverly Hills skyline. He had always prided himself on running an establishment of class, elegance, and exclusivity, but today, he realized exclusivity had taken on a meaning he never intended. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts before dialing a number. "Linda, clear my schedule for tomorrow morning," he said. "I want to personally meet with our corporate team. We need to make some changes, and I want it done immediately." The assistant on the other end hesitated. "Changes, sir?" "Yes," Harrison said firmly. "Bias training. Oversight on hiring. Customer service policies, everything. And I want a public statement drafted. Not damage control, accountability. If this happened once, it's happened before. And I won't have it happen again." As he hung up, he exhaled slowly. Today had been uncomfortable. Eye-opening. Necessary. Meanwhile, across town, Snoop sat at home, watching his wife fasten the delicate gold bracelet around her wrist. The small emerald glinted under the soft glow of their living room lights. "It's beautiful," she said, turning her wrist to admire it. "You always know how to pick the perfect gift." Snoop smiled, but there was something deeper in his eyes, something that made her pause. "Everything okay?" she asked, gently touching his arm. He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "It will be," he said. "One day." Because for all the progress, for all the small victories, the fight was far from over. But today, at least, a step had been taken. And sometimes, that was enough to keep going. Rather than simply intervening in the moment, Mr. Harrison understood that addressing this one incident wasn't enough. A single act of correction couldn't erase the harm that had been done or prevent it from happening again. What he had witnessed inside his own store was not an isolated event, it was a reflection of a much larger problem. And as someone in a position of power, he knew he had a responsibility to do more than just apologize. That evening, he sat in his office, the weight of the day pressing heavily on his chest. The city skyline stretched before him, the glow of Beverly Hills flickering through the large glass windows, but his mind wasn't on the world outside. Instead, he was replaying every second of what had transpired at Glamour Boutique, from the dismissive glances of his store manager to the steady, controlled patience of Snoop Dogg, a man who had every reason to be outraged but chose instead to stand firm. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. What could he possibly say that would matter? Then he took a deep breath and began typing. This wasn't going to be a carefully crafted PR statement. It wasn't going to be a polished excuse or a vague corporate apology. This needed to be something real, a public acknowledgement of the problem and a commitment to real change. Today, something happened in one of my stores that should never have happened anywhere. With those first words, he laid it all out. The microaggressions. The assumption of guilt before innocence. The bias, both conscious and unconscious, that led to a customer being treated as though he didn't belong. He didn't just condemn what had happened, he owned it. He admitted that moments like this weren't rare. That far too many people, especially black men and women, faced the same kind of scrutiny every single day. That business owners, managers, and staff members across the world were often blind to the prejudices lurking within their establishments. And then he outlined a plan. Not just a vague promise to do better, but real, concrete steps. Every employee, from top-level management to the sales associates, would undergo mandatory training in bias awareness and inclusivity. The hiring process would be reevaluated to ensure diversity at every level. Secret shoppers and audits would be implemented to monitor how customers were being treated, ensuring that what happened today never happened again. Finally, he vowed that Glamour Boutique, and every business under his name, would be a space where everyone, regardless of race, background, or status, felt welcome. It wasn't about saving face. It was about taking responsibility. What started as a moment of humiliation for one man became something far bigger, a catalyst for change, a mirror held up to the world, a wake-up call that could no longer be ignored. The next morning, a headline that couldn't be ignored. By sunrise, Glamour Boutique was all over the news. But not for its latest luxury collection. Not for the exclusive designer pieces showcased in its Beverly Hills storefront. Instead, the name was trending because of the incident that had unfolded behind its walls. And even more than that, because of the open letter that followed. Mr. Harrison's statement went viral, spreading like wildfire across social media, news outlets, and community discussions. It wasn't just a story about one boutique. It was a reflection of a much larger issue. People shared their own experiences, stories of being followed in stores, asked if they could afford an item, ignored while other customers were welcomed with smiles. The response was powerful. Some voices were angry. Others were hopeful. But all of them contributed to a collective reckoning. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about the everyday reality of racial bias and the long overdue demand for change. Snoop reads the letter and sees something different this time. At lunch, Snoop sat at his desk, scrolling through his phone. He wasn't expecting much. Apologies were easy. Damage control was a business strategy. He had seen it all before. But as he read through Mr. Harrison's statement, he saw something different. It wasn't a half-hearted excuse. It wasn't a corporate brush-off. It was real. Direct, honest, and for once, there was accountability. It didn't erase the frustration. It didn't undo the years of moments just like this one, moments that never went viral, never got addressed, never had an audience to witness them. But it was a step in the right direction. And right now, that was enough. The ripple effect, a symbol that couldn't be ignored. At home, Snoop's wife fastened the bracelet around her wrist, turning it under the light. "It's beautiful," she said, smiling. You always know how to pick the perfect gift. Snoop smiled back, but there was something deeper in his eyes. She caught it immediately. Everything okay? He hesitated, then nodded. It will be. Because this bracelet wasn't just jewelry anymore. It was a reminder. A reminder that even in the face of humiliation, dignity and accountability could prevail. That real change only happens when people refuse to stay silent. And that sometimes, standing your ground can turn a moment of prejudice into a movement toward progress. Mr. Harrison's next steps, more than just an apology. Across town, Mr. Harrison sat at his desk, watching the world's reaction unfold. He didn't see himself as a hero. Far from it. But he understood something now that he hadn't before. Privilege isn't just something you benefit from, it's something you have a duty to use responsibly. So as his assistant walked in with a clipboard, he made his next move. Schedule a full staff meeting, he said. Every single employee is going through bias training immediately. I also want oversight on all hiring practices going forward. No excuses. His assistant nodded, scribbling down notes. And one more thing, he added, his voice lower but firm. Make sure this story reaches the right ears. Not as a PR stunt, but as a message. A reminder of why vigilance matters. As she left the room, the weight of the moment settled in. This wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of something bigger. Why this matters, and why we can't stay silent. Prejudice, whether loud and blatant or quiet and insidious, leaves scars. But standing against it, even in small, everyday moments, is how real change begins. It takes courage. It takes accountability. It takes the willingness to learn, to listen, and to do better. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Because change doesn't happen in silence. And respect? That should never be something people have to fight for. Subscribe for more stories that inspire action, reflection, and progress.